Hello, so I'm pretty much just making this video because a lot of people don't actually know how to make click counters, so this is going to go very in-depth actually, as opposed to a lot of other tutorials. So let's get right into it. So the very basic is, let's take software example. This is just our border. Like, this is what's important. This is a border that you cannot get across, and that's pretty much what's important of it. But we want to turn that off via whatever means. So for example, we can get a touch trigger of group 1 and give this group 1, so this goes to this, and that will turn it off. Now I'm assuming a lot of you know how this stuff works and basics of triggers, but for those of you who are just learning what I just told you, you're not ready for click counters yet at all. But as you could expect, we actually instead want this to be toggling something on. And so, which is where we actually start counting clicks. So this is the most simple counter you can make. The stacked multiplication counter. I cannot talk, oh my gosh. But pretty much, we're going to have item ID and collision ID 0 actually work for some reason. But anyway, we're going to have this activate this, and then we're going to have a count trigger for ID 0 of target ID 2, and then whatever number we put in here will be how many clicks it requires. Now you could just put in, but geometry actually literally crash. And there's something called the 32-bit integer limit, where it overflows after about 2 billion, and then it goes to -2 billion. So a very neat trick you can do is just do -1. This will require 2 to the power 32, or about 4.2 billion clicks. And then we can have this activate group number 2, which adds 1 to number 1. So now we have item ID 0 and item ID 1. And then one more count trigger that will item ID 1, 3, and -1. And this will finally turn off this. And for however many stacks you have, you can write this as 2 to the 32 to the however many layers. And this is the very most basic version of a click counter. In fact, it's so overused that it was banned on the TPLL a long time ago. And this is really all you can get if you want something that's actually possible within the game. But if you're here, you're probably here from the TPLL. So we're going to get collision counters. Let's get into the very basic cage counter. So I'm going to stop using these arrows for a second, but usually for like static walls you have 0, but pretty much we're going to have 2 collision blocks. You want to scale these down because when they're at 100%, this counts as colliding. That is colliding because hitboxes are, I guess, bigger than they should be, but I don't know. You usually want to scale it down, and if it's going to ever be moving, you need to check dynamic block. Otherwise, it won't work. For static ones, they don't need to be dynamic block, but I don't know, it just doesn't really matter. But okay, so we're going to give this group 3, and then take a dot, like this, and give it group 4. Some people like using blocks, but I'm going to go with this. And now we're going to, when we touch, we're going to be moving 3 towards make sure it's multi-trigger and spawn trigger. We're going to be moving it towards our stationary block, and we're going to be moving our marker, our dot, away. So when I give these one, it should look like this. Oh, hang on. It should look like this, which is absolutely perfect, but this is not really any good. So we're going to put a collision trigger for when 0 and 1 collide, trigger 5 because that's the next available group, and then we're going to move 3 to 4. So now, this is a very simple 2 to the n counter, n being however many times it reaches there. And so 2 to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this by definition grows exponentially. So just pumping a big number really works in here, but again, banned on TPLL, kind of. Not really this, but a variation of this called a cage counter. So let's just give 3 stacks of these and change this to X only for reasons. This means that it will only go to the X. So X only because we're going to be having 6 of 2 down here, and then 2, 7, and when these two collide, we move 6 towards the main block. Nice, but let's just add one more layer. And boom, now we're done with a very simple, with a cage counter. This is what's banned on the TPLL for overuse, because somebody just got a free top 7 out of this. But what this is doing is for each row, it is adding 1 arrow to a 2, that many arrows, and then however many times the last one hits the block. But you can actually do things to modify this. For example, we could instead be moving this by 20, or something like moving it by 10 blocks. And this is now a 10 triple arrow X counter because it is moving by, or is it 9? Whatever, pretty much changing this number changes the base value of it. So this is a cage counter, but this is banned, like I said. But there are variations of this, but I want to introduce you to follow triggers and just how overpowered they can be. So let's just take this, have a new number 6 right here, and instead we're moving 4, 2, 6, and the only new addition is that 6 is following 4 this whole time, and we'll leave it at this. So this is our cage counter, or our normal 2 to the n counter before. But if we bump this to 2, the distance will now double every click, instead of just adding n, and it also breaks down on the normal GD engine, which is why this is very strictly TPLL. But there's another thing we can do. If we set this to 100, move this like that, and get rid of this stuff, on touch, we're going to be moving 6, our dot to collision, so nice. And instead, our collision is following our dot with an X mod of 0.5. Okay, and what this does right here is this halves the distance between these two blocks. We're going to take this and give it 5. This right here is called a super task counter because that's what it is. We are halving the distance between the block every time, and this actually requires infinite clicks to make. This is not allowed on TPLL for obvious reasons, but this allowed on things like the CCLL and MPLL, but this is just really one of the only ways to make an actual infinity counter. And something to note, since hitboxes are broken, you only need to click like 20 times when they're active. Yeah, that's very much not infinity. So usually what people do is move them a singular step over, and boom, look at that. But pretty much, this is really the only way to actually make an infinity counter, and then by stacking these cage counters and stuff on top of that. There is another way that people use, and I want you to tell me, does this make sense? Okay, so what you do. Yep, this is the most common design for an absolute infinity counter. It does not work, as you can probably tell, but that's pretty much, yeah, what people got in the MPLL. Why I don't like it anymore. But anyway, let's get into the advanced territory, because everybody's covered those. Let's get into the advanced stuff. Variables. Let's use one of these as a variable, okay, and we'll call it mode right here. Now let's give a very simple example, and I name it block 2. We're just going to group this one as 2, and then right here we have 2 instant count triggers, but we can really just code 1 and then adjust the next one. Item ID 0, 3, 0, spawn trigger mode to trigger. Oh yeah, we're bringing back the arrows, baby. But pretty much what this is saying is, all this is saying is, if mode is 0, do 3. If mode is 1, do 4. So what we're going to do for this is, if mode is 3, then we're going to move 2 in the negative X, and if it's not, we're going to move it in the positive X. Number these, and if we look, I'm an idiot, but you saw that triggered it properly. We just need to activate group because I'm not smart, but anyway, now this is correct because mode is always, variables are always, or count IDs, but I consider them as variables, are always 0 when the level starts, unless you specify with the count trigger. So let's do that. Let's use collision triggers. So for 0 and 1, or no, 0 and 2, we're going to turn 5 on, and 5 will, 5, that's when these two collide, will change mode to 1, or technically by 1, but since we know it's at 0, we can just change it by 1, so it will be at 1. And then this becomes 5. And look at that. We can do same thing with 6. And change count by -1. And do 6. Or no. 1 and 2. And now look at this. And now let's take a look in normal mode so we can see these changing. So yeah, this is what it's saying. For mode 0, we're going this way. For mode 1, we're going this way. Now this may seem very simple, but this, when used in different contexts, can be extremely powerful. Why don't we talk about sequence encoders? So I'm scrapping this whole level. I'm not going to build a sequence encoder now. No. But what I am going to do is show you one sequence encoder in particular. So this is a level called Omega Club, and this is, so let's change this to So these are the real magic behind the counter right here. So I changed it to 10, but pretty much it just moves these 10, or 1 block, but 10 spaces, so 1 block. And this may look completely random. Oh, why does it look? This may look like nothing's getting achieved. Like it's just random movement, but that is because it's complicated. It took me so long to understand how this thing works. But pretty much, here's the breakdown. If we measure the distance between those, translate it to binary, and then translate that into a sequence, we can translate the distance of a block to the origin into a sequence. But how do we do that? Let's take the binary 1101. This is 13, so this would be expressed as exactly here. And we can translate this to a sequence of 0 and 1. Because we have 1, then no zeros, then 1, 1 0, so that's 1, and then a 1. 1s are being used as separators or delimiters, and then zeros are counting what that is in the sequence. So with this, you can have an arbitrarily large sequence with arbitrarily large numbers in it. Only on TPLL engine, but still, this is very big, literally. But what can we do with this? One very famous example is the Ackermann swarm. The Ackermann swarm is actually very simple to it's very simple to understand, and this is literally it. We start off with a sequence, say 2, and then for the next one, so we're going to have 2, and then our row number is 1, so I'm going to have 1 here, and then for here, our row number is 2, and we're going to take the last term, which is just the last thing of the sequence, subtract 1 from it, and then have row copies of it at the end. Since this is just this, we have that. And then we do this again, and then, and 3 of those, because this is row 3. And if it's a 0, we just cut it off. So the row ends up at 13. So AW of 2 equals equals 13 because we're running the Ackermann's worm on 2, which is our starting number, and then we're counting how many rows it takes until we're done with it. But this is also written as function omega of 2. Now I don't have a fancy keyboard, but it's what you see on TPLL all the time, in fact. And this is a very simple thing to do, and you might say, okay, but why is this useful? We need big numbers, like bigger than Graham's number. In fact, something that is literally Graham's number is in 5th place. So, what do we exactly do from here? Well, like, this doesn't get big, but let's actually have a program for this. So right here, let's run it on 1 and just show you what happens with it. Okay, you see that? And then 2 just runs like this. We already saw it explode like that. And we get 14. But what happens when we run 3 and set wait time to 1 frame? Well, let's speed this up. Let's speed this up to just run it as fast as Scratch will allow it to run. We're here at 20,000 and it's still going. In fact, this will go for like 40k. We're at 40k and we just got rid of another. It'll take 80k to get the next, 16, 32, and it'll keep going down. This explodes very fast, as opposed to this one, which took, look at that, 14, from 3, 14, and then like millions. Now, try and guess just how big about 10,000 would be. Now, that's all well and good, but how do we code this in Geometry Dash? Well, you can see there are 2 collision blocks here, and we use a mode variable, or at least he did. I'd say we, but I've coded made one of these before, and essentially, when mode is 1, we are instead doing the exact opposite of what we've been doing, and we're moving them closer together. And we're measuring when the sequence becomes odd because these 2 will collide just like that. Essentially, we find every time we half it, every time the 1 and 2 collide, we add 1 to our term that we're measuring. And as soon as these 2 collide, we stop and we know what our last term is, but we did just cut it off. But for Ackermann's worm, this is perfect because we want cut off. And then we just subtract 1 and add that row many times. Lemmy did this by moving this until it goes, which just feels uncomfortable, but I did it too. I can't really be saying anything, but it's very efficient. This is a very efficient counter, and in a nutshell, that's all that we're doing, and we're just repeating that. And of course, if last term is 0, then we just cut it off. Very simple. But where can we go beyond this? We can actually jump literally. Watch this. Expansion Club, which is literally Graham's number.
this is what we have. Notice how this is almost identical. In fact, if we take this away, if we delete iterations, the setup is identical. We have we ignore that. We have our sequence, row, and last term. So what is iterations? Well, iterations is moving 64, and if you know, Graham's number is G64. So this iterations is where the heart of the function is. And I actually made a Graham's number sequence encoder instead of, well, not Graham's number, but G function. And literally all that it is, so essentially this repeat right here, mine has lag, but notice how this one goes out, but pretty much all that we're doing is every time we finish our sequence, row will be big. But now if we run an Ackermann's worm on that new row, then it gets interesting. And as you could guess, this repeat is how many times we do it. Every time we repeat it, we're doing G of +1. So, for example, we're repeating 100,000 times, give or take. This will give us Graham's G of 100,000. And this is a very simple thing to implement. I actually implemented it kind of unintentionally, having no idea that that's actually what it did, but still, super cool and very simple to go from there. But where do we go from there? I introduce you to the primitive sequence, or what the heck happened here? So this one's less fleshed out as the program goes, but pretty much, let's take a sequence, but essentially, let's do, so think of it this way. We take our sequence, and then we take the bad root, which is very simple. It's literally just the first term, or going backwards, that's less than our last term. So in this case, that is 1. Then we cut the last term off, and then our bad part is bad root and everything in front of it. So this could be way further down, but still. And then we just put that as the bad part, or 1 in this case. And then we add row many, or in this case row would be 1. Don't trust these. And that's just 1. And it's literally that simple. And we just repeat that. But you need a certain kind of sequence that'll work with this. An example is something like this. Now let's run it. That explodes very fast. And in fact, if we do this, oh boy, what have I done? And as you could guess, same as Ackermann's worm, if the last term is 0, just delete it, essentially. Pretty much this gets very big very fast. If you thought that our Ackermann's worm grew big, let's take a look at where Epsilon club is, right here. This uses that function, but the number that you plug into the function is what interests me. This is bigger than Graham's number in this sense. Big. It is big in number. But the number that's plugged into there is 10. Compared to 10,000 down here, or 64 down here. that should show you just how fast this actually grows. And then there are these, which have he has no explanations for them. This is the last explanation of a level. They just stopped. So, in a nutshell, I have no idea how these work, and pretty much I have no idea how these work, and probably won't for a long time. But what I do know is Pumpkin Everclear X, which has been the hardest for a long time, uses 2 sequences for some reason. Anyway, that's all I have for today. This is a very, very in-depth video on how to make click counters, but anyway,